a game day edition of the Daily Crow and a game day conversation we're having with JC Shurburtt of Inside the Game of the Big Spur. JC, what's going on, my friend? Happy game day. Good morning, and I appreciate you taking the time. Man, what's up?
Hey, no problem. Good to be with you today, Chris, and certainly uh, kind of happy that it's game day today. I think sometimes I don't know about everybody else. I get a little anxious during the week, around this time, and a lot of memories have come back this week in terms of the Thursday night contest around Carolina, and I think that's awesome. So, it's a good feeling. I know when these things have been rescheduled in the past, it's the fourth time this has happened or canceled, as it was in 2018 with Marshall. Maybe there's not those positive feelings, but it's been really cool this week. Good to play South Carolina State again. A lot of respect for that program, and getting ready to go. Happy game day got moved up a couple of days this week.
Yeah. JC, you asked me the question. You obviously bring it up, so I'll ask it right back to you. Favorite Thursday night memory as a Gamecock or watching Gamecocks football? Obviously, I know we talked yesterday. The 09 Ole Miss game is one that the birth of Sandstorm, that's the one that jumps to the top. But there's been some great ones. 05 UCF, Steve Spurrier's debut. 2010 Southern Miss. You think of 07 against Kentucky on that rainy Thursday night in 07. 2001 Mississippi State was one you brought up. What's your which game again? I know 09 Ole Miss, like we talked yesterday, that's kind of the no-brainer answer. But Thursday night games, most memorable Thursday nights for South Carolina football you can recall.
I'm going to go that 01 Mississippi State game was mine. Just kind of what was going on in our country. The fact that I had a bachelor party that night, that was kind of fun. Lifetime memories that weekend with my buddy getting married, one of my best friends in the world. And just kind of at the time, Chris, South Carolina and Mississippi State were permanent opponents. I think the Gamecocks have won once in Starkville ever since they joined the SEC. At the time, they were a good team. At the time in 01, Jackie Sherrill, that was kind of his last good team. Andrew Pinnock broke free for a big touchdown run late. Carolina's defense dominated a 16-14 win. And that really kind of set the tone for a 5-0 start that year. Carolina, I think, got into the top 10 before losing at Arkansas. But, that game was cathartic in a lot of ways. I was at 07 Kentucky and at 09 Ole Miss. And I think those games were very, very important in terms of how Spurrier built the program into what it ultimately was, surpassing its previous ceiling. So I'm not discounting those games at all. But just for me personally, I like that. And then yesterday, we were talking about the Muschamp opener at Vandy that year. Boy, you look back at that. That's another one of those gritty Gamecock-style wins. Because Vandy probably outplayed Carolina most of that game, and the Gamecocks defense just would not relent. Elliott Fry hit the big field goal and kept the streak going against the Commodores. In the grand scheme of things, I don't know that anybody's going to look back on that game and be like, "Oh, that was a great memory." Hey. Yeah, for me, it definitely was. My bad on that. I mean, I don't know. I may have hit something. I don't know.
Hey, Muschamp Hackers, you just experienced it.
Yeah, there we go. The ghost of the machine.
Now you're really in the Daily Crow.
I believe now. I am a believer now.
As you were talking about the 2016
game. Yeah, it goes back. It's like, it's you got to overcome the adversity on the field. Yeah. You just see his face.
Beautiful. Well, JC, it's funny, man. I was looking at the weather report. I know that, kudos to South Carolina first thing for being willing to make the decision and get out ahead of it. And this is something where you can't wait till day of or day before or anything like that to, because there's a lot that goes into hosting a football game when you talk about, with the fans and the teams and all the, everything that goes into game day. It's interesting, though, JC, you look at the weather now for Columbia, high of 73 on Saturday and an 8% chance of rain. So it's like maybe they could have played Saturday. I don't know. It's but I think South Carolina, obviously, with the information they had available at the time, made the best possible decision. Because if you don't make the decision and it's a wash on Saturday, like you mentioned, you really lose out on an opportunity to pick up a win that, you might need going down the stretch.
Yeah, and you don't want to. The worst case scenario is you're sitting there and you cancel the game like they did in 18. You may not find an Akron, that can come play you. I mean, you don't know what's going to happen with other schools. I mean, could you have gone and maybe gotten? I mean, I don't know. And the other thing is this: the storm is probably going to hit the coast of South Carolina. It'll be much diminished. Thank God, because I mean, there's a bad situation in Southwest Florida now, really throughout the state of Florida. But it's just one of those things where you think about first responders and police and EMS and people that need maybe to get off the coast that are right there on the beach or whatever. And the storm surge will happen. That maybe need those hotel rooms and stuff in Columbia that would have been taken up. So. This one, the other ones I've had really mixed feelings about. Of course, in 2015, when they had to move it to Baton Rouge, that was a tragedy. There in Columbia, they just couldn't do it. The Marshall game in 18, I was like, well, they probably looking back could have played. Same with 2016 in Georgia at home. So I was I didn't really feel great about those. But this one, maybe I'm just selfish and impatient, wanting to get to the game and get it done. But, I didn't have a big problem with this. I do think they made the right call, with regards to, not just the weather, but the overall setup. And the University of South Carolina is sort of situated differently than, say, Clemson in the sense that, it is further toward the coastline. When you do evacuate, Clemson and the upstate, the bigger cities in the upstate get inundated, but that far northwestern corner, maybe not so much. So I get it. It was good. I'm glad that Ray Tanner, Buddy Pugh, and Shane Beamer and everybody agreed. Both schools are coming in and playing it tonight. And heck, it goes from being a noon kickoff where nobody would be watching to one of the only college football games on tonight, which of course it's up against the NFL, but some people aren't NFL fans. So it'll be a good chance to, get some exposure on the SEC network in prime time that maybe, wouldn't normally have happened.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm excited. Side note, I got my family coming into town tonight, so we're going to have us a big family affair watching the game, and should be a good night. Should be a fun night at Williams-Brice Stadium for sure. Let's talk on the field, JC. And first, we'll just lightly touch. I know it's game day for South Carolina State, but we haven't talked to you really since the Charlotte game. Obviously, Marshawn Lloyd was what really stood out. I feel like that was the story coming from that game. But, I won't dive too deep into the weeds on it because, again, it's game day for this game. But biggest takeaways from that one? I mean, I know it's hard to draw conclusions from these feel-good games or get-right games or what have you. But Marshawn Lloyd, certainly the story. Anything else that jumped out from that big win over Charlotte?
Yeah, well, I mean, the other thing about it, Chris, I was thinking about this, and I didn't mention it in talking about this game is, the get-right games Carolina's had, exceptions probably, Eastern Illinois in the opener last year, they haven't really gotten right, If you think about Troy, you think about Vandy, you think about, East Carolina was going to be tough because it was up there, but, Georgia State this year, you sort of look at the box scores of those, you're like, man, Carolina was kind of fortunate. Yeah. Very happy for Lloyd. I think another probably a more underrated aspect of the game. Two things stand out. Christian Bill Smith coming in, getting his first real significant action, scoring 2 touchdowns, showing that physicality, showing he's healthy, ready to go. They were counting on him to be kind of that second back, this season. So I thought that was a positive, and I'm looking forward to watching him play tonight. Also, on the offensive line, Ja'Kai Moore and Tyshawn Wanamaker at tackle. Tyshawn sort of outplayed the rest of the guys the last 2 years. I mean, he got beat out in camp by Dylan Wanham, but I thought he played really well, and I think that Ja'Kai Moore, who is finally healthy, obviously was a big-time recruit. Carolina beat Clemson and Penn State on him. He's from Northern Virginia. Getting out there and competing like he did, regardless of opponent, was a welcome development. And then third, the defense. And I said it, the week before the Charlotte game. I talked to a coaching buddy of mine, and he's like, South Carolina's got to start taking chances on defense. They can't just sit back and bleed to death. And in the second half, you saw South Carolina's defense attack the Charlotte offense, kind of take the fight to them. I think if South Carolina's going to get better and better on D this year, that's kind of the strategy Clayton White and those guys need to take, and then you just live with the results, because sitting back and letting them punch you in the face and make play after play, regardless of if you limit explosives or not. I mean, that's the way to die a slow death. I'd rather go out fighting.
By 1,000 paper cuts.
Yeah, I'd rather go out fighting. And I thought the second half, Clayton White and the defensive staff made the decision to do that. And I think it worked well. And I think that type of play will continue to work well this year, even against SEC opponents, provided the offense doesn't, just go back in the tank, and then that's a problem as well.
Yeah, I agree with you, JC, on the defensive side. Again, I think it's one of those things where, yeah, you might limit the explosives, but I can live with making aggressive mistakes. Making conservative mistakes is just it's hard to see, and it's demoralizing. It's just demoralizing when you got a Charlotte going 7 for 7 at one point on third down. You're like, you just mentally you're like, I don't think we can stop them. Like, any third down they get, you're like, well, here it comes. I mean, it's just.
I've seen it, and the key with, like, I don't necessarily always mind bend but don't break, because I think a lot of good Carolina defenses have been that way. I remember the East Carolina game, Muschamp's first year. My gosh, they went up and down the field, and but the thing Carolina did in that game, they tightened in the red zone. This defense this year has not been tightening in the red zone. The other teams get inside the 20, and it's the same old, 5 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards, 6 yards. Chunk. And they just weren't getting off the field. So I felt good about that plan of attack. And certainly tonight, I think they need to do the same thing. South Carolina State's got a future NFL wide receiver in Shaquan Davis. They got a veteran quarterback in Corey Fields. I think Kentrell Flowers is going to be back at running back. But South Carolina has an overwhelming advantage up front with their front seven on defense. They got playmakers in the secondary. I think, as Todd Ellis always says, let them eat. Let them eat tonight defensively. And don't let South Carolina State come in with some, cute game plan where Davis is going off and you're in a game that you really shouldn't be in.
Right. Yeah, let's start on the defensive side, JC, because everybody wants to talk offense. So we'll switch things up a little bit. To your point, defensively, how do you attack SC State? I guess you just mentioned, obviously, aggressiveness, getting after them. I agree, putting the pressure on them. They've obviously got the Davis kid on the outside. I think that matchup with him and Cam Smith is going to be a lot of fun, and just him against the South Carolina secondary. But, how are you attacking SC State? Again, it's interesting to ask you questions like this because, on one hand, just to be transparent, it just feels like a game where South Carolina should be able to kind of just do whatever. But you still want to go into it and, again, pull as many positives as you can and execute on a game plan. So defensively, what is that game plan for you? Is it that attacking nature like you were mentioning earlier, or is it something else?
Well, you have to be a little bit careful because if Flowers is back, he played in one game against Bethune-Cookman this year, and he went off 16 carries, 153 yards. It's Bethune-Cookman. They won it easily, 33-9. Other than that, they were held to 12 rushing yards against NC A&T last week, North Carolina A&T, in a 41-27 loss. And then they only mustered 91 yards against UCF in a loss in the opener. So they're not really a running football team. SC State used to run something kind of similar to Rich Rodriguez's offense with a lot of zone read, running quarterback, that kind of thing back in the 2000s, late 2000s, last time South Carolina played them. They're much more of a pass-oriented group with former Gamecock quarterback Bennett Swaggart dialing it up. What you want to avoid is, looking at the stats and saying, all right, they're just going to try to throw it, so let's go. And then you make mistakes and over pursue. And Flowers is running a draw play for about 70 yards and a touchdown. You don't want to gamble too much there because I do think him being healthy is a key to their rushing attack. But they haven't shown the ability to really run it consistently They sort of go as Fields and that passing game goes. They've only played 3 games. It's their 4th straight road game. So if I'm the Gamecocks, what I'm doing is just playing assignment football and seeing, how well you can play the run if they try to run on early downs, and then, get after the quarterback, whether that's with 4, whether you're blitzing, whatever. I do think Davis is dangerous, but I also think Fields under pressure is not the most accurate passer there is. He's not a guy like I don't know, name your QB, Trevor Lawrence, or in college, or Bryce Young. You go after Bryce Young, he's going to step up in the pocket, fire it down the field, and you're dead. But Fields isn't that kind of guy. So I think you got to make him uncomfortable, and then just make sure there's no kind of, I call it a sneak attack in the run game, provided Flowers is healthy.
Now, offensively, JC, I know we've talked all week about getting Spencer Rattler going and working on the downfield passing game. It's interesting with this weather. You're going to have about 15-mile-an-hour winds, so I wonder how that affects the game plan. And also, you look at SC State defensively, giving up 255 yards rushing per game. The run game, I think, will be there yet again if South kind of wants to take it. But I think you and I would agree, balance, if at all possible, is what we want to see. Again, you got to take the weather into consideration, so how much they throw the football, I think it'll be interesting to see. But as balanced an attack as possible, I think that's really the end goal and what fans want to see. And just, again, starting to build some real confidence for Spencer Rattler as you gear up for Kentucky next weekend.
Yeah, I look at that, and I went back and watched a lot of the Charlotte game and stuff, and I guess you see him run and run at will, and it's kind of like, well, they take any shots, whatever. I thought Rattler quietly had a very efficient football game. And there may be games this year where that's what he has to do, is just be efficient, keep them honest, and kind of, they didn't pass to set up the run against Charlotte because Charlotte just couldn't stop them. But there could be some games this year where those little short passes and stuff are effective, and then you back them off and you start to run the ball. I'd like to see more vertical shots. Obviously, I think if there's a guy, when you're just talking about, the wind and how that could affect things, I mentioned Fields. I think the wind could affect their vertical game. I think Rattler's got enough velocity on his balls, though. He can slice through it. Now, the winds get up to 25, 30-mile-an-hour gusts. That's a little bit different. That's a different story. But, 15, I think he could probably, has enough arm strength to handle that. I'm looking for Juice Wells, the juice, to get loose again. Came back, was not catchless against Charlotte like he was against Georgia, which I'll never understand why he didn't get any targets against Georgia, but that happens around here sometimes. I'm looking for him to get loose. Obviously, Jaheim Bell is on what I call milk carton watch. Where is he in the passing game? I mentioned Christian Bill Smith earlier. I think this is a chance for him to really get going, and all that. And Austin Stogner to a certain extent too. I mean, 9 catches in 4 games. That's not bad. I mean, that's 2 a game. He's a tight end, but I'd like to see him get a little vertical, go across the middle a little bit, because he hasn't made a lot of plays this year, like his highlight plays at Oklahoma down the field. And he's capable, and that's a weapon when you have a guy like that. I mean, you watch pro football, you can see that, right? Not to bring up a sore subject there with pro football, but it's that he's kind of on my list too. And you can just put Josh Vann on that list from now on. I feel bad for him in a lot of ways because he had such a great year last year. He's had some drops, and frankly, he's just been outplayed by Jalen Brooks and some other guys this year. The most negative thing outside of the early defensive struggles last week, I thought, was, 75-yard punt return for Josh. You feel good about it, and penalty brings it back. So it's been a tough year for him so far. And just kind of look at him on a personal level and what's happened in his life, being a new father and stuff like that. He's a really, really good person. And you pull for somebody like that, just like we all were pulling for Lloyd to have a breakout type game. I'm just pulling for Josh to kind of get out there, get some catches, make some plays, because he's been almost non-existent this year in the passing game. So that's kind of what I'm looking for on offense. Like I said, if the wind gets a little bit more ridiculous than 15, they may have to just ground and pound a bit. But, considering what State's done against the rush this year, I mean, in that Bethune-Cookman game that they won 33-9, Bethune-Cookman still rushed for 191 yards on them. So they're not the strongest run defense. I think they're like, Charlotte's bottom of the barrel in FBS. SC State and FCS, they're down there. 602 total yards against UCF. No matter how good Gus Malzahn is, that's a lot of yards. And Carolina should have similar success tonight.
Yeah, JC, I was going to say, if you're going to put Jaheim Bell on a milk carton watch, then what would you put Josh Vann on?
Missing. Have you seen me? Yeah, he's the sign. Yeah, he's up there in the gas station, man.
Yeah, the signs are out. Let's switch gears a little bit, JC. In regards to this game, I think we both feel very confident what the end result's going to be. And, I've called it a name your score game. Is that a little aggressive? I don't tend to think so, but I mean, whatever. It's a game that we feel confident South Carolina is going to have their way. It's going to be a fun night for the Garnet and Black. So this is a game you expect to, in the second half at minimum, to get some different guys in there, get some younger players. I know defensively we've already played a ton of young guys. Really, we didn't have a choice, right? Because guys have gotten injured. But is there a specific youngster you'd like to see get in the game and get some more action and kind of, because this is the week, right? This is a game to give guys opportunities to just see what they do under the lights against, competition. There's only so much you can see in practice and scrimmages. It's different when you get live bullets in an actual game. So is there a certain player, we haven't seen a quarterback outside of Spencer Rattler or Luke Doty take a snap? Is this the night you see a Tanner Bailey or a Braden Davis or a Colton Gauthier, or maybe even to Carry-On Joyner get some looks under center, just to get them some experience? But any young guys specifically that you would like to see and you realistically could see getting in this ball game late and getting an opportunity?
Yes. I'll say this. I want to see more of Bam Martin Scott on defense. Stone Blanton's healthy again. Those two guys, man, I really think they're going to need them, as we move forward for depth purposes. I mean, one more injury at linebacker, and one of those guys is playing. So Donovan Westmoreland is in that category as well for me. On the D-line, TJ Sanders has been playing. I want to see more of him. Brian Thomas, if he's going to be an edge and be in the rotation, he needs as many snaps as he can possibly get moving forward. Offensively, is one guy, Lavoisier Carroll. I understand Turbo Miller is ahead of him or whatever. It has kind of been the mop-up duty guy, but Lavoisier is learning how to transition back from corner to running back. And I don't think he's hurt. I mean, you never know with injuries around here, but I would like to see him get some carries if the game gets out of hand, because I think when you're talking about Miller, you're talking about a one-year guy that's a walk-on. Lavoisier was a top 100 recruit, obviously the elite athlete, redshirted last year at Georgia, so there's no red shirt. I mean, I would play him and get him as many snaps and carries as possible when the time is right, just for the future, because you just don't, he's not going to actually he'll get better, but the best way to get better quickly in football is to play the game in the games. Right. And so I'd really like to see him, and have been kind of surprised that he hadn't gotten out there more in some of these games that have gotten out of hand.
Kind of on a fun note, JC, Nashawn Goddard is the offensive line coach for South Carolina State. And I would just love to get your takes on, I'm not sure if you've ever had any one-on-one conversation with him, or when you got to cover him at South Carolina. Obviously was a fantastic player for USC. And I bring him up because I've had him on my airwaves, and just a phenomenal conversation. He's one of those guys that lights up a room, and just really, really cool. I feel like that he's coming back, and I know this is a big game for him, and he still loves the University of South Carolina and loves being a Gamecock. Just talk about him, and I don't know if you ever had any one-on-one combos with him. If you did, what your takeaways were from him, and obviously your takeaways from, when he played at South Carolina.
Yeah, the pride of Dayton, Ohio. He was a Holtz recruit and ended up playing for Spurrier the last year. I had just gotten out of the newspaper business and into the internet. Rivals.com. I joined that organization in December of 2004 and was not covering the Gamecocks at the time. His last year, I think, was 05. But yeah, the type of guy that, anybody you talk to that's affiliated with the Carolina program absolutely loved him. They still love him. I think he's a good coach. I think he's got a bright future. It certainly was part of a lot of interesting teams at South Carolina there. That end of the Holtz era, beginning of the Spurrier era was very interesting, around South Carolina. And I'll never forget the tackles on that 05 team. Interesting thing about that 05 team too, that Spurrier's first team was they didn't arguably Shane Beamer inherited a more complete roster from Muschamp. And I know Muschamp did not inherit as complete of a roster as Spurrier did, but it was still, there were still like walk-ons starting on the offensive line and at tight end by the end of the year. The running backs on that team were true freshmen or Dacus Turman. They were thin, but then you look back on it and they did have Chris White at center. They did have Nashawn Goddard and Jabari Levy at tackle. Obviously Savell Newton played a big part in that year before hurt. And then I think what really gets lost is Jonathan Joseph and Coach Simpson in the secondary. That secondary was really good. But I remember Goddard, a good quote he had after the Gamecocks beat Florida about Coach Spurrier. He said, he's just taken this team and put it on his shoulders and elevated it. And that's when you that quote has always stuck with me because, after those games where Carolina beat Tennessee in Knoxville and then came back and beat Urban Meyer and the Gators with Spurrier's first contest against his old team, you just kind of felt that. It was kind of his quote was sort of a reinforcement of why, Steve Spurrier is kind of a magical coach and came in and you knew at that point, he's going to elevate this thing one way or the other, and ultimately he did.
Giving me chills, JC, because those are the teams that I really grew up with. I tell people end of 02, beginning of 03, when I was about 11 or 12, was when it really clicked for me what Carolina football meant. So those first couple Spurrier teams, those were, and the end of the Holtz era, those were the teams that I really grew up on. I know for every Gamecock fan, you can tell kind of which era Gamecock fans grew up in, because like even the 90s, we've got somebody that tunes into this, and I know others too. Like, those teams in the 90s weren't all that great, but it's, when you grow up with certain teams, it's like those are the teams you fell in love with. It really doesn't even matter what the record was. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was the 80s. Gosh, because I didn't really understand football when I was, 6, 7, 8. I don't know why the sport just it was complicated. I knew all about baseball since I was 5. It's easy. Basketball, put the ball in the hoop. That's fine. The intricacies of football didn't really, I guess it was 86 was the first year's Todd Ellis's redshirt freshman year where I was like, oh, this is what this is. This is awesome. So the 80s teams were there. And then I suffered through most of the 90s. I was in college and stuff, and we used to go to games all the time. And then those teams you were talking about from 00 to 06, I rarely missed a game, home or away. Yeah. I think I've gotten older and don't really enjoy going to the games as much anymore. But those are memories for me too. I'll never forget how despondent I was. And I wasn't this despondent until 2017 Kentucky again. After the Independence Bowl, they lost to Missouri that year, Spurrier's first team.
Big in that game too, right?
I went to Shreveport, man, and up 28-7. It looks like the fun and gun is back. Yeah. And then all of a sudden, I guess Nix left the middle of the field wide open for Brad Smith to exploit, and they came back and won. And I'll never forget how despondent I was after that game. Luckily for me, I went to the Horseshoe Casino afterward. We won $400 playing blackjack, so I was all right then. But, those were magical times, and no matter what, almost lose to Wofford, that's okay. Get blown out at Auburn with Antonio Hefner at quarterback, That's okay. That loss to Clemson in '05 was brutal because Sidney Rice dropped like the one pass he would drop his whole career. And I think he was going to fall into the end zone. They didn't score a touchdown. They gave us 13-9. That's okay. You just kind of believed good things were going to happen, and doggone it, they did.
Yeah, there was a purity of those times, JC. I feel like, especially like in in '05, because now, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing. It's a great thing, obviously, that Steve Spurrier raised the expectations. But, now we expect to beat Tennessee. We expect to beat Florida. We expect to beat, we want to beat Georgia, whatever. And it's like, I just remember '05, like beating Tennessee for the first time ever in Neyland, beating Florida for the first time since like 1930. There was a purity to it. There was a purity to it. By the way, shout out that secondary. Fred Bennett was another guy that was.
I forgot it. Yeah, Fred Bennett and
Bennett and Joseph on the corners. That was a hell of a duo. And then
Stoney Woodson a backup too, and Stoney started the next year and actually got drafted. That was something. Yeah,
because Stoney had a big pick six, I think, in the '08 Tennessee game. I think it was.
Right. Yeah.
Had a pick six in that one.
Really good player.
Anyways, JC, this has been incredible, man. I appreciate you taking the time. Obviously, again, happy game day. Looking forward to the game tonight. And, of course, next week we'll do it. It'll be a big one as we get ready for that Kentucky game, a pivotal one on the schedule, of course. But we'll worry about that this time next week. Appreciate you, JC, and always a pleasure to chat with you, and we'll do it again soon. And thank you for having me on you guys' airwaves as well.
Oh, that's no problem. Thank you, Chris. It's been fun this week, and we'll holler at you soon. Happy game day to everybody out there.